Hello everyone, my name is Melinda Martin and I'm the Gallery Director here at Linden New Art. Tonight I'm joining you from the gallery in front of Nicholas Boland's exhibition, Burn Down the House. Welcome to Linden's New Arts event, Strange Bedfellows. This event pairs two speakers addressing completely unrelated subjects, followed by questions from the audience. During the first part of the program, the presenters will share their specialised knowledge in a short and sharp 20-minute lecture. As I explain to them, I have the power to make them appear and disappear on the screen. We get to listen and we get to learn. But during the Q&A, anything can happen as you, the audience, find the connections. Both speakers must answer the questions that you ask, even if it isn't their specialised topic area. The harder the question, the more insightful and funnier the responses are. And tonight, we're presenting this event in partnership with our very good neighbours, the Jewish Museum of Australia. So gather your friends, prepare to learn some weird and wonderful facts, and compete to see if you can come up with the winning questions. Prizes will be awarded to those with the best questions or connections this evening. So, is there any possible collection between Lagerphones and antique dolls? But before we find out, I'd like to welcome our co-host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamar Simons and I'm the Education and Programs Manager at the Jewish Museum of Australia. Thank you so much, Melinda and Linden New Art for inviting us to be a part of tonight's event. At the Jewish Museum of Australia, we illuminate Jewish life. At the intersection of art and Jewish culture, our museum is a place for all people to share in the Australian Jewish experience. We are currently doing just this in presenting Mirka, the story of Mirka Mora, artist and icon, learner and teacher, child, survivor, lover, mother and friend. Mirka's spirit is as much a part of her legacy as the imprint she leaves on Australian artistic, creative, cultural and cosmopolitan life. Tonight, you will get a glimpse into one of Mirka's passions, antique dolls. We hope that this piques your interest and we invite you to visit us at the museum to immerse yourself in the magic of Mirka. Thanks, Melinda.
Thanks so much, Tamar. And I have to say, Mirka is one of my childhood favourites, so I'm looking forward to exploring the show a little soon. By now, you've probably attended a few virtual events from home, but we want to make sure that everyone feels welcomed and well informed and knows how it's going to work tonight. I'd suggest you grab a glass of something and maybe some suitable snacks. Tonight, we're coming to you live on YouTube and Facebook. If you're watching us live tonight and you'd like to make a comment, you will need to log into whatever platform you're watching us through. We'd love to hear from you. We'll bring up your questions on screen after the presentations this evening. And as I mentioned, before the best question or connection, there will be prizes awarded up for grabs. Tonight, it's a Hendrick's gin pack. Hello. And you'll get 6 glasses, a bottle of gin and some tonic, and also a Mirka Mora prize pack, which is a beautiful
colouring in book from designs from Mirka's sketchbooks, and also a gorgeous tote bag with Mirka's artwork on it. And these have just hit our Jewish Museum store. So you'll be first in with those great prizes.
So if you'd like to make a comment, what you need to do is click on the say something or the write a comment box at the bottom of the live chat area to get started. If you're watching through a TV, well, congratulations, you're just a bit awesomely too clever. But chatting, alas, gets a little complicated. So we recommend that you chat through a computer, a tablet or a mobile device. Before we begin tonight's Strange Bedfellows, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we virtually meet this evening. Both Tamar and I are joining you on the lands of the Yalukit clan of the Boonwurrung people here in Melbourne. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And whilst we meet virtually this evening, tonight draws upon the ancient history of this land and it reflects the millennia of experiences of First Nations people coming together to celebrate, to make art, to learn from each other and to connect. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to any First Nations people who are joining us this evening. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Mr. Dobe Newton, OAM. Dobe is the front man in the Crazy Made custom suits. I think you're exemplifying that this evening. To always being a singing dad who in the late 1960s was saved from his university studies and real life plans to be a lawyer by a bunch of Irish folkies who introduced him to the Dubliners. Can I just say, Dobe, I have gone through that same experience. My parents and my grandparents loved that music. He was handed a Lagerphone and a tin whistle, and bush music nestled into his bones. In 1972, he joined the original Bushwhackers and I'm not going to be able to pronounce that. I knew I was going to trip over this word when we went live. The Bullockys Bush Band, which quickly established legendary pub residencies in Melbourne's inner north and soon tuned their attention to the folk revival that was sweeping Europe at the time. 5 European tours over the next 7 years saw the band establish a significant reputation and fan base as energetic, skillful interpreters of a unique Australian version of that Anglo-Celtic tradition. Dobe was a founding member of the Country Music Association of Australia, is the current president, and helped establish the Australian College of Country Music. Well known as the co-author of the iconic I Am Australian, Dobe is in his 48th year of bushwhacking. We won't hold that against you, Dobe. And he's doing what he loves best, belting the hell out of a Lagerphone. Dobe, welcome.
Thank you. Gosh, that makes me sound really, really old.
Not at all. Spring chicken.
No, it's true. It's true. Yes, so I'm an accidental Lagophonist. And before I start about the Lagerphone, I probably should tell you how I came to play this ridiculous thing with bottle tops all over it. When I was at university in Sydney, I fell in love, basically. And I was a really pretty ordinary drummer, I have to say, in a high school and university band, you know, playing blues and soul, and this is 60s stuff. And so I fell in love on New Year's Eve in Sydney. And then the next day I discovered the person I'd fallen in love with lived in Perth. And so I made up this ridiculous story, which my parents later admitted they never believed, that in order to further my studies, I had to go to Perth, to university in Perth. Anyway, they let me go. And while I was at the University of Perth, I met a bunch of crazy Irish folkies, and they were just about to form a band, and I couldn't take the drums with me across to Perth, so I didn't have an instrument, but it just so happened that the person who played the Lagerphone and the whistle was leaving. And they said, well, here, have a go at this. You're a drummer. You can probably keep time. So they handed me the Lagerphone, and here I am 50 odd years later. And it seemed so much lighter to play in those days. It's a bit heavier these days. So anyway, so let me tell you about the Lagerphone. Its origins are shrouded in history, but we never let that get in the way of a good story, do we? So Linda, could you put up the first slide, please? So we call it a Lagerphone for obvious reasons, beer bottle tops. And that's Australia's contribution to the instrument, but it goes back some centuries, and these are some of the names by which it has been known over those centuries. The Mendoza, the Jingling Johnny, the Zob Stick, the Monkey Stick, the Stump Fiddle, the Pongacello, and the Murrumbidgee River Rattler, which I particularly like. So, how did we come to have this unique Australian instrument, which we call a Lagerphone? Thank you, Linda. So, all throughout Europe and the Asian continent and South America, there are various versions of what I like to think is the distant cousin of the Lagerphone. And so going back many centuries, marching and military bands from all sorts of countries around the world had ornamental staffs which were adorned, as you can see in this example. The photo is of a Turkish Mater band and from approximately 1910, I believe. And as you'll see, the staff was adorned with plumes and bells and various pieces of metal, and it was banged up and down and made a percussive jingling sound. The theory, sorry, Linda, next one if you would. The theory is that basically the English and some Scots fighters who went to the Crusades to fight the Muslims centuries ago, the theory is that they brought home a version of these staves that they would have seen the Ottoman troops parading with, and that they adapted it to the British Army. So it was known as a Jingling Johnny, and there is a version in Stirling Castle in Scotland which dates back a couple of centuries, and it was basically a pole with bells and metal pieces attached, and the idea was it was banged on the ground to help keep time so that the troops marched in time. Forward to the invention of the bottle top. And so on the right here, we have a monkey stick. Now, nobody's quite sure why monkeys would be attached to a version of the Jingling Johnny. So on the left there is a fairly straightforward Jingling Johnny, which is being used by a Morris troupe, but nobody's quite sure why we should have a Jingling Johnny. And if it wasn't a novelty instrument beforehand, what happened was there was often a boot attached to the end of it, which was for comic relief, but also to stop people damaging the floor when they pounded it up and down. Next one, please, Linda. Okay, so when we were introduced, or when I was introduced, it was as a member of the original Bushwhackers and Bullockies Bush Band. But, as many people have pointed out to me over the years, we weren't, in fact, the very first Bushwhackers. The very first Bushwhackers were put together in the 1950s, and the reason they got together was they were folk musicians and they were members of the Sydney Bush Music Club. And in 1956, one of the very first homegrown musicals was written in Australia, and it was called Reedy River, and it was basically a socialist scenario, because in those days folk music was associated very, very strongly with left-wing politics. Many of the members of the original Bushwhackers, whose photo you see here, were in fact card-carrying members of the Communist Party, comrades. So Reedy River was an Australian musical, and it needed a soundtrack. And the writers of the musical decided that to keep it absolutely and purely Australian, they needed Australian folk songs. And the band was put together to be the onstage providers of the soundtrack to the musical. So that's how the Bushwhackers were born. And there on the right, you will see what we believe is the original Australian Lagerphone. Some of you on the road between Sydney and Melbourne will have undoubtedly come through the town of Holbrook, which has a submarine in the local park for some unfathomable reason. And Holbrook is also famous for very tricky traffic police who fine people to and from Sydney. But anyway, in the Woolpack Museum in Holbrook, you can see this original Lagerphone, which was basically a broomstick with the head of a broom still on it and bottle tops nailed loosely on it to make the jingling sound. And so we're not sure whether this is the inventor of the Australian version of the Lagerphone, because if you went back to those previous slides, most of those jingling johnnies and monkey sticks and European variants of, thank you very much, Linden. As you'll see, basically these are just a pole with bottle tops on it, which is banged up and down. Now, the difference with the Australian variant called the Lagerphone, thank you, Linda, if you could just whip back to that one. The variant was that this particular instrument had a crosspiece up the top, but it was also importantly played with a serrated stick, which you bowed across the pole, and it had the effect of the pole was the bass drum, and for those who are drummingly inclined, the pole was the bass drum and the stick provided the tambourine and the snare sound. So it's like a mini drum kit in a way. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's what you need to make one. So there's the pole. Now, when I got hold of the first Lagerphone, it had the top piece and a pole. And because I'd been a drummer, it occurred to me that if I added a second cross piece, then using the stick, which I will demonstrate to you in a moment, using the stick, I could actually play, I could bang the pole, but I could also play off that bottom piece to create some additional rhythmic effects. This is a metal sleeve simply because you bang the hell out of it, and this one, I believe, was my 53rd Lagerphone. So basically what you need is a bunch of bottle tops. This here is a hollow punch, which you use to make holes in the bottle tops. And then you've got some screws and washers. So basically washer goes on screw, bottle top goes on screw, and you screw it loosely into the board so that it makes a rattling sound. I've also added a few cymbal bits and pieces, but really it's the only instrument that you can make by taking a trip to Bunnings, which is quite exciting, really. And over the years, as I said, I've constructed approximately 53 of these, and I'm just about getting it down, I reckon. Now, I think I'm probably about to run out of time, and I was asked if I would actually demonstrate. Oh, so look, this is, you can play a bit of that, but I've dressed up especially. So here's a little bit of me playing in the shed, maybe. No? All right. Well, here's going to be a bit of me playing here. So just bear with me for a second while I organise this. So here is said Lagerphone, and the stick, or the wand as I call it, has very large upholstery nails which give you the effect. So I know this isn't totally professional, is it? But all right, so no, a little bit more. Okay, there we are. You can see what I'm doing. So just excuse me while I put the music on. Oh, this was all going so well earlier. All right. This is what you get when you deal with semi-professionals, you know. All right, so here we go. I hope. Oh, ah, dear. See? Oh, isn't that awful? It worked just before I came on. All right, well, we'll see how we go. Come on. Oh, this is dreadful. All right, well, it was supposed to be with music, but...
We can hum, though. We can hum. Off
Sorry.
you go.
All right, so here we go. There we are.
So, perfect
Hey.
performance.
Oh, that was awful. I teed up the music and everything.
It was perfectly fine. Joe, I've got one quick question.
Ah,
How many bottle caps normally go in to the average Lagerphone?
oh, yes, I should have said that. About 400. I thought many, many years ago, I got in touch with Foster's because they were quite big many years ago. And the reason I got in touch with them was because they were the only ones still left that had cork in the back of the top, and you have to take that out because with the plastic inside modern ones, they don't make a noise at all. So I got in touch with Foster's and said, what about sponsoring me, thinking that they might send me a bucket load of money or a lot of grog. And instead of that, they sent me 10,000 bottle tops. And I've just about worked my way through all of them.
I love it because I am currently surrounded by some artwork which has 7,000 bottle tops on it.
Wow.
So, yeah, I am particularly intrigued. Joe, thank you for your lovely contribution to the topic of Lagerphones. I feel I have learned an awful lot. I think my favourite name is the Murrumbidgee
Rattler.
Yes, I feel like that has a quintessentially Australian concept, and I think that is now how I will refer to them in the future.
Oh, yeah, no, mine too.
Thank you so much. And for those of you playing along at home, I hope you're writing down your questions. If you want to visit the Bushwhackers Band, hop online and see their website. If you haven't had a chance to listen to some of their music, you have that to look forward to. So, Dobe, thank you very much for being the first player in Strange Bedfellows this evening.
My pleasure, and I'm looking forward to Graham.
Let me get started. So this is the bit in between the great conversations that we have about mini lectures where we talk about the money bit. So in early 2019, the great Australian artist Patricia Piccinini opened an exhibition here at Linden, and she reflected how the first ever exhibition she had here at Linden was where the hustle began for her as being an artist. So in the tradition of hustling and shaking a Lagerphone to get attention, it's now my turn to talk about money. This is the bit where we ask you to support us if you're able to do so. We're offering this event free online so everyone can enjoy the experience, but it takes a lot of two organisations, very small teams, to actually be able to put this event on for free. We'd suggest a figure of $15 or $20 per person. Think of it as buying me a glass of very nice sparkling wine. You could buy Dobe a couple of boutique beers if you like. And of course, if you'd like to add a few more zeros to those numbers, look, we won't say no. We're not shy about accepting that. The link to donate securely is online on the bottom of the screen, and it will appear on your chat. We need your support now more than ever, and we thank you in advance for your generosity. Tonight we'll be sharing our donations with our good friends at the Jewish Museum of Australia, so please give generously so we can share the money across two organisations. I'm now going to hand over to my co-host, Tamar Simons, to introduce our next presenter. Tamar.
Thank you so much, Melinda. And Dobe, that was just fascinating. I now know a whole lot about Lagerphones that I never knew before. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Graham Horn from Abingdon Auctions Australia. Graham has been in charge of Abingdon Auctions Australia since 2001, producing all of their detailed catalogues, valuations and appraisals. During this time, he has sold dolls up to a total of $26,000, stuffed bears to a value of $10,000 and doll houses to $20,000. Graham also performs valuations and lectures about doll collecting at doll fairs across Australia. Between 2006 and 2015, Graham produced the Collecting Bears and Dolls magazine, as well as the Australian Shirley Temple Collector News, quarterly magazine from 1998 to 2014. For 4 consecutive years, Graham was the expert on 3AK weekly talkback radio program with Lee Drew, undertaking valuations for late night listeners. Hi, Graham. Good evening, and thank you so much
Tamar.
for joining us.
Yes, looking forward to this. It was nice to hear Dobe. A big fan of the Bushwhackers I was. I remember seeing them down at the Edith Vale show, football ground one time when I was a young fella. So there you go. So that makes me younger than Dobe. That's all that matters.
Wonderful. We'll now hand over to you and get to learn a whole lot about antique dolls.
That's all right. Thanks, Tamar. Well, collecting is like any collecting business. It's we hold 4 auctions a year for our people. We hold our auctions at the Glen Ira Town Hall, and they're also live online, which has been the case for the last year. So we ship all over the world every auction. So, but collecting dolls, the first dolls were wooden dolls, carved wooden dolls. They didn't really come to Australia. The Queen Anne doll's probably the most famous one of those sorts of dolls. Okay, can bring anywhere from 15 to 25,000 these days, US dollars, I'd say. But the dolls that did make it to Australia were China heads, wax dolls made in English, and German wax dolls. The English used a poured wax method. So these came out with people in their travels, the 1870s, more popular in that period. But the English wax dolls go back to 1840, that sort of period. So the China heads evolved from people that used to make porcelain cups and saucers and all of those sorts of things. Okay, so this was their sidelight to make a shoulder head, and you could put it on all sorts of different types of bodies and that. So and the hairstyles tend to date the dolls these days. So wax dolls, very important dolls. Okay, so generally they had inserted human hair into the doll. So if someone died, they often used to insert the human hair into the doll by needlepoint. And then the Germans started to produce the cheaper dolls, as they always have throughout history. The wax over plaster. So they'd have a plaster mold, they'd pour the wax over the top. They'd use different types of methods, wax over composition as well. But poured wax dolls, they're the really expensive dolls these days. But the English, they were the masters at that, absolute masters at it. And then in the same period at the end, like the 1870s, Parian dolls were introduced as well. Okay. So again, an extension of the China heads, but these were fancy dolls, very fancy dolls. We had a picture of there you go, that doll there. It is a fancy, very fancy Parian doll. And it's made by a company called J.D. Kestner & Co., Germany. And the Parians were the domain of the Germans. Okay, so there's really fancy Dresden lace that they used to put around them and everything. Very hard to make, and all hand painted. So that was a shoulder head, and they would export them like that with the lower limbs. and companies in America like Shackman and that would put bodies on them. So there's no such thing as an original body to a Parian doll or a China head, because they were shipped as a head, a shoulder head and the lower limbs, and then bodies were put on later, obviously for obvious reasons. And most of these bodies are wood filled or sawdust filled, that sort of thing. Okay, so they're the earlier dolls that you know, that are in Australia, no question about that. We sell them every auction. Okay, very hard to find Parian like that's probably one of the best Parians we've ever sold, to be quite honest. Okay, but the more important doll collecting period was really the French. You know, in the 1840s, 1850s and 60s, company called Francois Gaultier produced the Bebe heads, and they sold them to companies like Gemot, which is this one here, is the one pictured, is an 1890s one, Gemot. And there was other companies, Brew, Steiners. You know, the Brews were the expensive dolls. Brews can sell up to $50,000. You know, the doll that we sold for $26,000 was a Brew. And doll collecting is exactly like art collecting. There's peak periods for a doll maker. Gemot is the most interesting because the Franco-Prussian War, they used to get heads off Gaultier before the Franco-Prussian War. And then because the Franco-Prussian War was fought in a certain area, was where Gaultier's factory was, and Gemot built a factory way outside that. And so Gemot started to become the supplier of doll heads to a lot of company, and doll eyes in particular, the Geprati eyes made by a chap called Geprati from Italy, of course. But the Brew Bebe didn't really change the mold all that much. So the closed mouth dolls were the first ones, the really hard ones to make. And so Gemot, the different periods were the different family members. So there's like Emile Gemot, you know, this doll here that I've got that once belonged to Merca Moira, okay? It's a little EJ Gemot, so that's Emile Gemot's period, okay? There's a wax doll that it's on your screen now, okay? This is a German wax over plaster doll. And while not that expensive, it was a big companion doll. The history behind this doll is extraordinarily rare. The doll came out with a girl on the ship, and all the people on the ship, they put cloth over the box, the original box that she was in, and all the people on the ship decorated the doll box. And so there's a back view of the doll, and you can see the pink on the dress. So the dress would have been a lovely bright pink when it was original, but it's faded with time, as most materials do from that period. You usually can see the real color of any dolls in ribbons and that, because the ribbons were a different process. But the guests on the ship, well, the people traveling on the ship, decorated the box. So that's you know, yes, the doll's valuable, but the box just is as valuable as the doll. So that was you know, a lovely doll that we sold to Merca Moira from the 1870s. And so then you know, it's all about material. Okay, so poured wax, China heads, you know, they were making plates, wax, Parians, they're all making those materials, okay? And as they became more and more expensive, so the bis dolls took over from all of these dolls, and this is the golden age, as we call it, okay? So the 1860s through to the 1890s. And the 1890s, interesting from the point of view of, this is where the French doll makers were starting to get undersold by the German doll makers. And so all the lovely French dolls, the Brews, the Steiners, the Gemots, and so forth, they all formed a co-op and went under the banner of SFBJ. And so they all tipped in money and owned a certain piece of SFBJ. And this sort of allowed them to fight the Germans, so to speak, on a period, the late 1890s through to about 1930, okay, where SFBJ ceased production as such from Bis dolls and all that sort of thing. They were over the compositions by then. But the German dolls, so the Bebe, which is what these dolls on the screen is a Bebe, you know, Jameau Bebe. The Germans discovered that their customers wanted childlike dolls. So they went for the round faces. The early companies, you know, like Kestner and Armand Nassau and Schonau and Hofmeister, Kamer and Reinhardt, Simon and Helbig, produced a rounder face and a child, and this is took all the business off the French doll makers, because they were very expensive dolls to make back in the day. And so the Germans took over, producing cheaper dolls. They used a composition jointed body, so the French dolls were made with kid leather bodies to start with. Then they used bisque lower limbs, and then they started to use composition bodies. And so the Germans came straight in with their child dolls with the composition jointed body. So it's just a turned piece of wood, so to speak, with composition and wood balls in the middle for joints, okay, and they were jointed by elastic all the way through to the head. And so the German manufacturers, you know, had a great reign from the late 1890s, so to speak, all the way through to the 1920s. And then the same thing happened to them. You know, Bis dolls became too expensive to make. And so celluloids and composition started to come into vogue. And so I got this little celluloid puppy dog here with me today. Where is he? There he is there. Okay. Celluloid puppy dog, jointed limbs. Okay. You pull it out, you can see the little joining in the middle there. And so cellulose, the problem was that in the 1930s, they became illegal to produce because they were flammable. So it's not good to have toys that are flammable with young kids. And so composition dolls really took over in the 30s, but they did change the composition on celluloid dolls and so that they weren't flammable, but they just, as you can imagine, parents didn't want to buy them because of that. The Germans made the best celluloid dolls. The Japanese dolls tend to dry out, and you can put your hand through them if you push them too hard these days. So it was then up to different makers to come up with methods. And so in the 1910s, it was the introduction of the art doll. So the Kath Cruz dolls, which are really the pinnacle of that period, were made by painting oil paints on cloth, on 4 different types of cloth. So she made them for her daughter first, and then they became very popular. Reindeer skin and reindeer fur was stuffed inside them and everything, and stitched very tightly. And very arty. Like if you stretched it out on the canvas, it's still a very impressive painting it would make. That's for sure. So that's the 1910 period. Lenzi from Italy was then famous for their cloth dolls, felt dolls at that period. And, you know, today those dolls are really experiencing a hiatus as people come to understand how hard it is to maintain the colors on these dolls, because people put things in where they get residual light and they fade the dresses, like you saw on that wax doll there. You know, you turn it around the back, so obviously it's been facing the light a bit more than the back was, because the back would have been laid in the box maybe. But that's what happens. You know, you've got to be very careful with your residual light on materials. It can affect the value of your doll, that's for sure. So then composition dolls came into force. So composition dolls are basically any material they could find as a composite. So wood pulp was the most popular of these, okay? And the most popular composition doll, obviously, was the Shirley Temple doll, okay? December 1934, when it first came out, and was in continuous back order for so many years, okay? And so Shirley Temple was very popular, and the doll was very popular as well. And so once again, you get to the end of the late 30s and 40s, once again, composition was becoming too expensive to make as well. And so hard plastic started to make an introduction in the late 40s, about 49, okay, and the 50s. And so this produced a different country altogether. England came back into vogue. So they were making wax dolls. Now they're doing pedigree was the pinnacle of these dolls, pedigree hard plastics. Now, in Australia, if you wanted a pedigree doll, it was like the old Ford motor car. You know, you could have blonde, honey blonde, or brunette, long or short hair. They were your options. So most people in this country now would be like, what was that, 70 years old, would have a pedigree doll, okay? And they're subject to fading as well. So you see a lot of fade. If you lift the dress up, you'll see a lot of fade of the hard plastics and everything in that. So mostly sold naked in Coles and Woolies, those sorts of places. David Jones up in Sydney for our Sydney listeners. Yeah, so once again, that's what happened. The 50s was the hard plastic period, okay? And then as hard plastics became, what can we say, expensive again, vinyl dolls were introduced. So they left the head the same and replaced the body. Made the body vinyl and the head's vinyl, and then everything was vinyl. Okay, so that's the late 50s and 60s. And so you get your Madame Alexander dolls, which were started hard plastic and ended up vinyl. You get your Barbie dolls, which were the harder vinyl, okay, from 1959 through to the 60s. In Australia, we didn't get Barbie until 63, 64. So we got the bendable leg Barbie, and then Barbie went into Blythe dolls. Now, the interesting thing about Blythe dolls is, they're all the rage these days, and they'll drive you mad. The head was made for a dog, and the body is like a replica of a Barbie body to a certain degree. You'd pull a string at the back of the head, and the eyes changed colour 4 times, okay? These were an abject failure, and only lasted for 2 years. The interesting thing about the 2 years is that they were distributed in Australia for that year, and so we have all the important ones. They put out the Ribbons and Bow series to try and make it refire it and everything and that. So My Child dolls, Blythe dolls, and Barbie dolls, so they're all 60s, 70s, and 80s. So all those collectors now, they're like 50 years old. And so what happens with a collector, no matter what you collect, whether you collect dolls or bears or anything, you usually start trying to recreate your childhood. So, everybody wanted the 50s hard plastic dolls, and the 60s Barbies, and then the 70s, with all the dolls through that period with the vinyls and everything. And so that's what happens. The dolls will experience a hiatus like the 50s pedigrees. They went through the roof, the prices, and now they've settled back down, and now they want the really good ones in the box with the original dresses and everything and that. So it's it's all a period. It's all about what's the cheapest form of to be able to manufacture a doll, which determines a period. So you can actually blindfold me if you like and give me a doll, and you can feel what material it's made of, and you can tell what period it's from. And then in the 90s and that, everybody started to do reproduction dolls. So that makes it difficult for our collectors these days that can't differentiate between an antique bisque doll and a modern porcelain doll. So it's one of those things where, you have to be very aware of what you're buying. And that's where Abington Auctions comes in. We guarantee all our descriptions in our catalogue and everything and that. So no problems. I think that should do it for now. I think we should go to any questions that anybody might have, Melinda.
Graham, thank you. I feel like I have learnt so much about a weird and wondrous world of antique dolls. I'm now going to invite Joe to come back on screen, as well as Tamar, and we're going to start thinking about the questions and whether we can make any of the connections. We have some funny questions already that we think we can share. And I think the first question is, Graham, to you. Do communists buy antique dolls?
Well, we ship all over the world, and we have shipped antique bisque dolls to Russia. There you go. Only allowed to ship them to certain areas, so there you go.
One other question that we had, Dobe, you talked about going to Holgate, which is the home of the submarine.
Holbrook.
Holbrook, sorry. Could a submarine be turned into a Lagerphone?
Jesus, you'd need a bloody great stick to belt it with.
A lot of bottle tops too, Doug.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I forgot to say during the presentation is that I'm a great advocate for the fact that the sound of the instrument is enhanced if you have imbibed the liquor yourself. I mean, it's cheating, I know, to use the sponsor's product without
all
having
4,000 bottles from the lids.
Yes. Graham, I wanted to ask you a question, which was when I was reading your bio and I saw that you had edited the Shirley Temple magazine for something like 15 years. And I thought, my God, how can that be viable?
Well, it wasn't viable. It was a labour of love because I'm the Shirley Temple collector, Dobe. Shirley Temple collector. So I used to collect, the paraphernalia from the movies and everything and that. And when I got married, unbeknownst to me, my wife had a couple of Shirley Temple dolls. So there you go.
My aunt had one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The common thing about the Shirley Temple dolls, they used to hand them down because it was in the Depression period. So a lot of girls that had them had to hand them to the younger sister and so on and so forth.
I've tried doing that with a Lagerphone, but nobody wants one.
So we have one question, which I think I want both of you to answer. Ooh. Could the monkey on the Lagerphone be replaced with an antique doll? Graham, what do you think?
Well, I think that's a definite no there because the doll would break into a million pieces if you kept banging it up and down all the time, okay?
Could it not add to the percussion element of the performance?
It could, but you'd have to go down to Bunnings and get super glue and keep putting it back together after every performance.
So, Doug, what about you? Could the monkey on the Lagerphone be replaced with an antique doll?
Oh, hey, I'm up for anything. But I have tried adorning it with various things, but it just takes such a battering. And the reason I've made 53 of them is that they just break. You know, you belt the hell out of them and eventually they just simply fall apart. So I think the antique dolls are much safer in Graham's hands than mine.
I guess the next question I have is, it relates to the percussion element. Would you recommend whacking the hell out of an antique doll?
Well, you keep saying antique doll, so you have to be 100 years old to be an antique doll. So all of those dolls, that's bisque dolls, composition and celluloid, and any of those getting whacked the hell out of aren't going to last one song with Dobe going at it.
Maybe I'm more your hard plastic Barbie period.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think you could do all right with a pedigree doll, hard plastic doll.
Oh,
a cloth doll, maybe.
What about a Barbie on a Lagerphone? Could we do that?
Sure. Well, you'd have to have Barbie and Ken, wouldn't you? Just to be, politically.
Depends what position they're in.
Easy, right?
I'm interested in, you've both got very particular passions. They're quite unusual. Graham, what do your neighbours make of your passion?
They don't really know about my passion.
Oh, it's secret.
It's as simple as that. You know, we don't like to let people know what we do we? I'm known in Australia as the doll guy. Yeah, that's how you found me. and you know, a little sidelight that I didn't mention was that Mirka, who I used to deliver the dolls to her, Mirka used to buy an antique bisque doll when she was struggling to finish a an art series ready for a gallery showing and everything. So her little present to herself used to be an antique bisque doll. Okay, you know, so that's what she used to do, and she'd have them around her studio, hidden like little gnomes. I used to say to her, "Oh, where you hiding your gnomes today, Mirka?"
So, Dobe, what do your neighbours think about your passion?
Well, well, you heard it before, so it's not as if I can keep it entirely quiet. So they're aware, but we've got musicians on either side of us here in Northcote in Melbourne. So they rehearse, and I'm the only one down here. The rest of the bushwhackers these days are scattered from Brisbane down to Sydney, and I'm down here. And so thankfully I don't actually rehearse the Lagerphone, and they're very happy about that. And I just potter around the garden and we chat about music, and it's lovely.
So I have one question in. What are the best adornments for your passions? So, Dobe, the passion for the Lagerphone, what's the best adornment for it?
Well, basically dressing up to take the attention away from the fact that you're a grown man and who's obviously not got enough skill to play a proper musical instrument. So he's got this ridiculous stick with bottle tops all over it. So I figure if I dress up and jump about, people might go, wait a minute, that guy can't play anything.
So, Graham, what are the best adornments for your passion?
Adornments, that's a funny word to use, isn't it? That means I'm going to wear something. So I don't wear any. I don't dress up in dolls' outfits or anything like that. Nothing
now
like
I'm
that.
disappointed.
Now you're disappointed.
Graham, do you do repairs on any dolls?
No, I don't do repairs, and we just recently lost one of the guys at our best repair person in Victoria. So it's we restring dolls when they're valuable dolls. We restring them, okay. But we, as I said, it's very sad. David, was the preeminent repair person in this state. There's still people that do it, but it was interesting because throughout the country, in WA, it was a guy that was a repair guy as well, and same thing in South Australia, the main repair guy, and same thing in New South Wales. The main guys did all the repairs. It's just one of those things. It's the same overseas, like Theriolts is run by Francois Timar. So John actually knows all about the Barbie dolls. That's his passion, so not unusual. We have a number of male collectors.
So that leads me to another question, Job. Is there a world of Lagerphone repairmen out there in the world, or is it that's the musician who makes it also gets to repair it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, good God, I mean, it would hardly be a profession, would it? Now that's something you would keep secret. What do you do? I repair Lagerphones. No, as I said, the beauty of it is that, and I use the term loosely, as a musical instrument, it's one of the few things, unless you're one of those incredibly clever luthiers, it's one of the few instruments that you can totally make yourself and design yourself and adapt yourself, and And that's half the fun. And then when you've finished, you get to beat the hell out of it and eventually break it. And so you got to start again.
Very rock and roll.
Very rock and roll, yes.
I've got one question that I think connects the two kind of things quite cleverly. Would Shirley Temple be able to do a dance routine with a Lagerphone featuring as the musical accompaniment? Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, that's pretty easy. That's pretty easy. Probably do a dance with Bojangles, Robinson.
Nice. Yep.
That
So-
could be possible.
Well,
Except
she would,
the good ship, yeah, good ship lollipop. No Lagerphones on the good ship lollipop.
there could be, but she was a great tapper, and if nothing
Yes.
else, the Lagerphones. That's what it's all about, is the percussive effect. So, yeah. Let's
It's all possible.
yeah, maybe when I, get up there or down there, Shirley and I can get together and have a jam.
Sounds fabulous. We are getting to the end of our session. Tamar, who do you think had the best question? What do you think the best question was in all of that?
Oh, I don't know. I do like that final question. I've got a great visual happening of Shirley Temple with the Lagerphone. That's the one.
So if you are the person who actually asked that question, jump online and you need to just send an email to gallery@lindenarts.org. If you're over 18, you get to win the gin pack. But if you're under 18, you get to win the Mercamora pack, which Tamar is modelling very beautifully. I think the second question, if I was going to pull off the second question, I reckon it would be about communists. Do communists buy dolls? I think that's probably the second question. So if you asked either of those questions, please jump on in and send us an email and we will send you out our packs and prizes. Thank you so much for joining us, Graham and Dobe, in a hilarious, weird experiment that we like to play called Strange Bedfellows. We thank you for your insights. I feel like I have learnt a lot about both topics, and I feel like I now will go out into the world with great dinner party stories from now on. I'd like to thank my beautiful co-host, Tamar. Thank you so much. It's lovely to have you part of the adventure here at Linden. We really love working with our neighbours, the Jewish Museum of Australia, and thank you so much for helping us to present tonight. Thank you everyone who joined us, who jumped in and asked questions. Our teams look forward to welcoming you both to the Jewish Museum of Australia or to Linden New Art. We look forward to seeing you at our galleries very soon. Thank you so much for joining us on a cold, wet Melbourne rainy night. And good night. We look forward to seeing you soon.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.